Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It's Chris Nichols here, and today we are out with the Canon 600mm RF F11 lens. And I know this lens has been out for a while, but we finally got our hands on one to play with. There is also an 800mm lens, but we're going to stick with the 600mm. 800's too long for where we are right now. We are again at the Calgary Zoo. I know, 2 big telephoto reviews in a row at the zoo, but if you're wondering what's happened to my foot, well, you should watch our last video. It'll give you some context as to why I get to motor around in this and thus need a place where I can shoot wildlife and still have a pathway that I can actually get around on. So without further ado, let's get to it. It's gonna be super heavy.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, here. Yeah, okay.
Oh,
thanks.
Big boy. There you go.
Thank you. Now, what I do notice is that even though this is an affordable lens, it does feel quite well built. I love that we've got a command ring on there. That's excellent. Manual focus is really well dampened, and the usual controls here on the side for focus, stabilizer, and focus limiter. That's 12 meters to infinity, by the way. Now, of course, you can see this is quite a compact lens when stowed away, but this does have a lock-unlock mechanism. So I twist that, extend it. I have to relock it or else the camera functions won't work. There we go, and that's the lens in its actual usable form. And in this regard, I mean, it is still quite lightweight, a little front heavy, but these are 930 grams, so that's less than half a knocked. Overall, very easy, very maneuverable, and when you want to stow it away in your bag, it is nice that you can collapse it. So one of the challenges I'm facing here today using a fixed F11 aperture isn't just getting enough light for fast shutter speeds, it's also enough light to focus. So the Canon EOS R5 that I'm using today at F11, I can only use this central group of autofocusing points. That represents a few challenges. So first off, when I'm trying to follow animals using Canon's excellent animal eye tracking, I have to keep them in a relatively small central box or else the camera can't focus on them. The other problem is that kind of limits me to very central looking compositions, which is not necessarily pleasing. So I'm gonna have to crop my photos later, or I can focus and then let go of the focus and recompose. And you know, the one nice advantage there is at F11, I have a fair amount of depth of field that it should cover me. But this is a challenge you're gonna face using this lens. So the minimum focusing distance on this lens is 4.5 meters. That has caused some issues. I mean, wildlife and pens, no problem, but there's even situations where a bird is just across a pathway, you know, 8-9 feet away, and the lens just cannot focus on it. And there are some situations where, yeah, it has caused a problem, and it's hard for me to back up in this thing quickly. All right, let's go take a look at these files. All right, so we're back from our day shooting at the zoo. We've had a chance to look at some of our results, but before we get into that, I have to say that motorized wheelchair was incredibly fun. So I'm gonna ask you guys for a favor, one of two things. Either subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, or well, let's set up a GoFundMe account so I can get myself a motorized wheelchair because I'm hooked. Okay, so let's talk about autofocusing. We've already talked about the limited area that the lens is able to focus within. Now let's talk about the focusing speed. And unfortunately, it's not super impressive. Here's why. The motor's not particularly fast, and you really see that here if you watch us focusing from near objects close to the 4.5 meter minimum focusing distance, then focusing on something far away or infinity. You can see it takes a little bit of time here. Now, if you're focusing on only distant objects, that does speed things up a bit, but the only way to really get quick focusing is to turn on the focus limiter. That works great, but from 12 meters to infinity, that range can be quite limiting. You know, you're shooting animals far away and then you have a bird land in a tree. It's very often that it will be within that 12 meter focusing distance, and unfortunately the lens is just going to give up at that point. So you really got to be aware of this limitation when you're focusing with this lens to get the best results. So when we talk about image quality and sharpness, first off, the 600mm has a good stabilizer. In conjunction with the body, I felt I had a really nice stable shooting platform as long as I used appropriately fast shutter speeds. And I was actually very pleased with the sharpness that I got on this relatively affordable lens. So here you can see I'm focused in the center, of course, at f11, and the results are very good. Now I do normally focus in the corners. Remember, this camera cannot autofocus in the corners, so I did it manually, but honestly, it didn't make any difference really whether I focused in the center or the corners. I was getting nice flat field of sharpness across the whole frame. So really nice that way. Now bokeh on this lens. Of course, we cannot change our depth of field, but it is a 600mm lens, so you can still get nice out of focus soft backgrounds. I was very pleased with the look of the bokeh as things transition from out of focus back into focus, and the overall bokeh, because there's no aperture blades to worry about, is nice and round. So I found that quite pleasing, but of course I don't have any creative control to change it otherwise. So the last issue of note that I want to talk about is flare. Now, of course, if you've got a bright light source in the photo, there's not much you can do about that. You'll get some loss of contrast. But you can see in these examples, if you've got a bright light source like the sun or something just outside of frame, the loss of contrast is pretty severe. Lots of flare across the frame. Now, what would help mitigate that is a hood. But although this lens is very affordable and that's a big part of its appeal, it does not come with a hood. You have to buy that extra, and I would say that's pretty much an essential purchase. Now, another issue is the actual tripod mount itself. You'll see the lens does come with a pretty rudimentary base, and it's got a 1/4-inch thread there, but if you want to get a proper tripod collar to be able to use this on gimbal heads and just get a nice point of balance, that's another extra purchase that you're going to have to buy. So who is this lens for? Well, when you look at the entry-level price point, you might think, well, this is a great beginner lens to get into wildlife. But honestly, this lens has a lot of limitations, and you really have to kind of know what you're doing to work around them. You're going to be shooting at high ISOs a lot, and you're not going to be able to change depth of field creatively, and you really have to understand what that's going to do for you. This lens is absolutely light and compact, and I think that's one of the main reasons why I might look at this as something to have in my camera bag. But for most photographers out there, I think you'd actually do better spending more money, getting yourself something like a 150-600 Tamron or Sigma, in EF mount, and then getting the EF to R adapter. I think that would make a lot of sense. It would give you the versatility of having many different lenses, and you'd be able to change your depth of field, control your aperture. Anyways, I hope this video does help you guys decide whether this lens is a right purchase for you. Just please consider the limitations that we've talked about. Otherwise, please leave comments below and let us know what you think. And do check out DPReview.com. Of course, we've got our sample gallery from our fun zoo trip again. You'll see the links in the description below. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.